In the beginning, before time itself existed, before the universe was created, before there were stars or planets or anything at all, there was only God and his divine realm. In this realm of pure light and infinite glory, God created beings of extraordinary beauty and power. These were the angels, celestial beings made from living fire and light, created to serve, to worship, and to carry out the will of the Almighty across all of creation. Among all these magnificent beings, one angel stood above all others. His name was Lucifer, which means light-bearer or morning star. He was not just another angel. He was the most beautiful, most intelligent, most powerful being God had ever created, second only to God himself. Lucifer was crafted with such perfection that looking upon him was like gazing into the sun itself. His beauty was beyond description, his wisdom beyond measure, and his power beyond imagination. Lucifer held the highest position in all of heaven. He was the covering cherub, the angel who stood closest to the very throne of God. Ancient texts describe him as being adorned with precious stones, every jewel imaginable covering his being, reflecting light in countless colors. He was like a living prism of divine glory, and when he moved, it was as if rainbows danced through the heavens. He was perfection itself, the pinnacle of God's creative power, the crown jewel of all creation. God gave Lucifer tremendous authority and responsibility. He was the leader of the angelic choirs, the conductor of heaven's worship. When Lucifer led the angels in praise, their voices created harmonies so perfect, so beautiful, that they resonated through all of creation. He was the minister of music in heaven, and under his direction, the worship of God was a symphony of unimaginable beauty. Every note, every chord, every melody that Lucifer created was perfect, and all of heaven rejoiced in the glory of God through his leadership. For ages beyond counting, Lucifer served faithfully. He stood before the throne of God, basking in the direct presence of the Almighty, and he performed his duties with excellence. All the other angels looked up to him, admired him, followed his example. He was the greatest of them all, and he knew it. And therein lay the seed of what would become the greatest tragedy in all of cosmic history. Deep within his perfect heart, something began to change. Lucifer started to look at his own beauty, his own power, his own wisdom, and a thought entered his mind that had never existed before anywhere in the universe: pride. He began to think that perhaps he deserved more than just being a servant. Perhaps he deserved to be worshipped himself. Perhaps he deserved to sit on the throne rather than stand before it. The more Lucifer contemplated his own magnificence, the more this pride grew within him. He looked at God on the throne, receiving all the worship, all the glory, all the praise, and he began to resent it. Why should he, Lucifer, the most beautiful and powerful being in creation, bow down to anyone? Why should he serve when he could rule? These thoughts, once started, consumed him like a fire, growing stronger and darker with each passing moment. Lucifer began to speak to other angels, planting seeds of doubt and rebellion in their minds. He was subtle at first, questioning God's authority, suggesting that perhaps the angels deserved more freedom, more power, more recognition for their service. His charisma was overwhelming, his arguments persuasive, and his beauty and position gave his words tremendous weight. Slowly but surely, other angels began to listen, began to question, began to follow Lucifer down this dark path. The Bible tells us that, eventually, 1/3 of all the angels in heaven chose to follow Lucifer. Think about that for a moment. 1/3 of countless billions of celestial beings, all deciding to rebel against God himself. Lucifer's influence was so powerful, his rebellion so seductive, that he managed to convince a vast portion of heaven's armies to join him in his insurrection. Finally, the moment came when Lucifer's pride reached its ultimate expression. He stood up in the presence of God and made 5 declarations that would change everything forever. According to the prophet Isaiah, Lucifer said, "I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." 5 times Lucifer said, "I will." 5 times he declared his intention to exalt himself, to take God's place, to become equal with or even superior to the Creator himself. This was not just rebellion. This was cosmic treason of the highest order. This was a direct challenge to the sovereignty of God, an attempt to overthrow the very throne of heaven. War broke out in heaven. The prophet Revelation describes this cosmic battle in vivid detail. Lucifer and his rebel angels fought against Michael the archangel and the angels who remained loyal to God. This was not a war fought with swords and shields. This was a battle of unimaginable power, with beings of pure energy and light clashing in combat that shook the very foundations of heaven itself. But the outcome was never in doubt. Despite Lucifer's power, despite his beauty, despite his wisdom and the vast army of angels he had gathered to his cause, he could not stand against God. God, who had created Lucifer with a single word, who had given him every gift he possessed, remained infinitely more powerful. The rebellion was crushed. Lucifer and all the angels who followed him were defeated. Then came the moment of judgment. God cast Lucifer out of heaven. The Bible describes it like lightning falling from the sky. In an instant, Lucifer, the light-bearer, the morning star, the most beautiful being in creation, was hurled down from the highest heights to the lowest depths. He was expelled from the presence of God, banished from heaven forever, along with all the angels who had joined his rebellion. But something else happened in that moment of judgment. Lucifer was transformed. His beauty, which had been his greatest pride, was corrupted. His light became darkness. His glory became shame. The Bible tells us he became like a serpent, a dragon, a hideous monster. The covering cherub who had once stood in the very presence of God was now twisted into something terrible and frightening. He was no longer Lucifer, the light-bearer. He had become Satan, which means adversary or accuser. He had become the devil, which means slanderer. Satan fell to earth, and with him came all the demons, the fallen angels who had chosen to follow him in rebellion. These beings, who had once been glorious servants of God in heaven, were now twisted, corrupted entities, filled with hatred for God and for humanity. They retained their angelic powers and their intelligence, but now all their abilities were turned toward evil purposes. Satan found himself in a new reality. He was no longer in heaven, no longer in the presence of God's glory. Instead, he was confined to the earthly realm and the spiritual dimension associated with it. But his pride had not diminished. If anything, his hatred and anger had only grown stronger. He had lost the war in heaven, but he was determined to continue his rebellion in any way he could, and he found the perfect target for his revenge, humanity. When God created Adam and Eve, he placed them in the Garden of Eden, a paradise on earth. He gave them authority over all creation, the ability to walk with him in the cool of the day, and only one prohibition: they must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It was a simple test of obedience and trust. Satan saw this as his opportunity. If he could not defeat God directly, he would corrupt God's beloved creation. He would destroy the relationship between God and humanity. He would prove that even beings created in God's own image would choose rebellion when given the chance, just as he had done. So Satan, in the form of a serpent, approached Eve in the garden. His tactics were subtle and cunning. He did not come as a terrifying monster. He came as a beautiful, intelligent creature, speaking words that seemed reasonable, even enlightening. He questioned God's command, suggesting that God was holding something back from them, that God was afraid they would become like him if they ate the forbidden fruit. Satan's first words to humanity were a question designed to plant doubt. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? He was twisting God's words, making God's generous provision seem like cruel restriction. When Eve corrected him, explaining that they could eat from any tree except one, Satan responded with a direct contradiction of God's word. "You will not certainly die," he said. "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." This was the same lie that had caused Satan's own fall, repackaged for humanity. You can be like God. You can be your own authority. You don't need to obey. You deserve more than what you've been given. Eve looked at the fruit, saw that it was pleasing to the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom, and she ate. Then she gave some to Adam, and he ate as well. In that moment, everything changed. Sin entered the world. Death entered the world. The perfect relationship between God and humanity was broken. Adam and Eve's eyes were indeed opened, but not in the way Satan had promised. Instead of becoming like God, they became aware of their shame and nakedness. Instead of gaining power, they lost their innocence. Instead of ascending to divinity, they fell into mortality and sin. Satan had achieved his first victory over humanity, but it was a hollow victory. God immediately pronounced judgment on the serpent, declaring that enmity would exist between Satan and humanity, and that one day a descendant of the woman would crush Satan's head, though Satan would strike his heel. This was the first prophecy of the Messiah, of Jesus Christ, who would come to undo the damage Satan had caused. From that day forward, Satan became the enemy of humanity and the enemy of God's plan for redemption. He became the ruler of this fallen world, the prince of the power of the air, as the Bible calls him. Not because God gave him this authority, but because humanity had, through their disobedience, surrendered the dominion God had given them. Satan had usurped the position Adam was supposed to hold. Throughout human history, Satan has continued his work of deception, destruction, and rebellion. The Bible describes him with many names and titles that reveal his nature and his tactics. He is called the father of lies because deception is his primary weapon. He is called the accuser of the brethren because he constantly accuses believers before God, pointing out their failures and sins. He is called a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour because he is predatory and dangerous. He is called the God of this world because he has established systems and structures that oppose God's kingdom. Satan's methods are sophisticated and varied. Sometimes he comes as an angel of light, appearing beautiful and benevolent, offering things that seem good but lead to destruction. Other times he comes as a destroyer, bringing obvious evil, violence, and chaos. He tempts people with the same things that caused his own fall: pride, the desire for power, the craving for independence from God. He promotes lies and confusion, making truth seem relative and morality seem outdated. But Satan is not all-powerful. He is not equal to God. He is not the dark opposite of God in some cosmic balance. He is a created being, a fallen angel, and he remains subject to God's ultimate authority. The book of Job shows us that Satan cannot do anything without God's permission. He can tempt, deceive, and attack, but he cannot override human free will or God's sovereign plan. Throughout the Bible, we see Satan active in human affairs. He tempted Jesus in the wilderness, offering him all the kingdoms of the world if Jesus would bow down and worship him. Jesus rebuked him with Scripture, showing that Satan's offers are always traps, always coming with devastating conditions. Satan entered Judas, influencing him to betray Jesus. He sifted Peter like wheat, trying to destroy his faith. He plants weeds among the wheat in Jesus' parable, representing how he plants false believers among true ones to cause confusion and discord. The New Testament reveals that Satan has a kingdom, a dark hierarchy of demonic forces organized and working to oppose God's purposes. These are the principalities and powers, the rulers of darkness, the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms that Paul describes in Ephesians. They influence human governments, cultures, and individuals, always working to lead people away from God and toward destruction. But the New Testament also reveals Satan's ultimate fate. When Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead, he accomplished what Satan's fall had made necessary. He provided a way for humanity to be redeemed, to be restored to relationship with God, to have their sins forgiven and their guilt removed. Through Jesus' sacrifice, Satan's primary weapon, accusation and condemnation, was destroyed. Now, when Satan accuses believers, Jesus stands as their advocate, pointing to his own blood as payment for their sins. The book of Revelation tells us that Satan's time is limited. After Jesus' resurrection, Satan was cast down from his position as accuser in the heavenly court. Now he roams the earth, knowing his time is short, working with increased fury to deceive and destroy. But his final defeat is absolutely certain. The Bible prophesies that Satan will be bound for 1,000 years during Christ's millennial reign. After this, he will be released for a short time, will gather one final rebellion, and then will be cast into the lake of fire forever, where he will be tormented day and night for all eternity, along with all the demons who followed him, and all the humans who rejected God's offer of salvation. This is Satan's end, eternal punishment in the lake of fire, separated forever from God's presence, suffering the consequences of his rebellion and his crimes against God and humanity. The being who wanted to ascend above the stars, who wanted to be like the Most High, will be brought down to the lowest depths, completely and utterly defeated. The story of Lucifer's fall is a warning about the dangers of pride, of self-exaltation, of rebellion against God. It shows us that no matter how gifted, how beautiful, how powerful someone might be, pride can corrupt and destroy them. It reveals that sin has consequences, that rebellion against God never ends well no matter who attempts it, and it demonstrates that God's authority is absolute, his judgment is righteous, and his ultimate victory is certain.